Welcome to Community Roundtable. I'm Nick Burns from the Salt Lake Community College Division of Communication and Performing Arts, and I'm your host as we explore topics of special interest and concern to the residents of the cities and unincorporated areas of Salt Lake County. And these are topics that we feel are equally important to the general public throughout all of Utah. And today on the show, we look south. Specifically, we look to South Jordan. This is a city of over 60,000 people. It has doubled in size in only about 10 years. Now, South Jordan is a new Tree City, USA, and we'll ask how the city keeps itself in water. Also, with population growth comes new challenges for city services like fire protection. So, today on Community Roundtable, South Jordan is growing up, and we welcome South Jordan City Manager Gary Whatcott. Gary, hi.
Hi.
How you doing?
Great. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Oh, thank you for doing this. Yeah. So, you're the city manager.
I am, yes.
So you have that city manager system in South Jordan rather than the mayor city council organization?
Yeah, it's a mayor council form. The mayor is the CEO of the city, and I'm the chief administrative officer for the city.
Okay.
Yes.
So you're doing the mayor's bidding?
I do the council's work, yes, and run the day-to-day operations of the city and make sure that their initiatives and goals are achieved as a group. So okay. I work for the body, the elected body.
So you serve at the pleasure of the council more than the mayor?
Yes, the mayor appoints, but the council ratifies that decision. So,
okay.
Yes, it's a combination really of both the mayor and councils.
And I want to get back to this, but you worked your way up, I guess I should say, through the fire department in South Jordan.
Yeah, I had kind of a unique kind of a road to city management, if you will. I don't know how many city managers come through a public safety background, but a long time ago, I started my career as a volunteer firefighter, of all things, back in the early and late 70s. And then actually started a career in law enforcement. Was my first time full-time job in city government. And then back in the 80s, it was a little bit kind of in vogue to do public safety. I don't know if you recall those years, but there were combining police and fire departments together, and particularly smaller suburban type communities, and trying to find efficiencies and cost effectiveness of public safety. And so there for a while, I did both police and fire as a public safety officer, which was a kind of unique experience. But then later came to South Jordan as they were growing and to start their fire service there.
So you were the first firefighter?
I was the first full-time paid firefighter in South Jordan. Yeah, that was in 1991.
So how big was South Jordan in 1991?
I think the 90 census was about 12,200 or something of that nature, so pretty small.
So you've grown 500% in 25 years?
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
That's kind of frightening almost.
Yeah, it's really crazy. And it's been a really interesting opportunity to be part of such a high-growth community. It's a constant pressure there that you feel that growth, and and you've got the old guard and the new guard, and people, that was a rural area of mostly agricultural based, and then you start moving urban ideas and people into a place like that. There's always going to be a certain amount of conflict that arises over that, but it's been interesting and fun at the same time.
So, I mean, that mix sounds potentially difficult. You've got sort of the gentleman 5 acres with the horses, and then all of a sudden the neighbor's going to be subdivided and turned into, 0.2 acre lots or something?
Yeah, that's correct.
Uh-huh.
It's very challenging from a zoning perspective. The city did a good job in those early years of trying to plan well and to ensure the proper buffering between those types of things. But over the years, I would say now we're very, very small percentage of South Jordan residents have horses and have those kinds of 5 acre lot types, if you will. They're not very far in between.
So you're much more suburban now.
Very suburban, yes.
So even your website talks about South Jordan as big families and big yards.
Yes.
Which I thought was and property values are quite high compared to, say, Salt Lake County or elsewhere up and down Utah County.
Yeah, I think we hold really good property values. I think a lot of it has to do with the zoning requirements.
How so?
Well, I think that we require a certain amount of brick, stone, and stucco products on a home. And the size of the lots are going to dictate a certain a cost requirement, and then the type of homes that go on those lots have been fairly large,
high end
over the years. The old term, I think it's been called McMansions, if you will, but so that's been the trend over the years until Daybreak came along and kind of changed that. And Daybreak is all in South Jordan. It's one subdivision. It's 4,200 acres of a planned unit community, and they've done quite a different job than the traditional urban or suburban type design with cul-de-sacs. This is more on the more urban design of a grid system and a little tighter density and so forth.
I mean, a lot of people don't, I think a lot of people would be surprised that if you think of South Jordan and you think of those, you said McMansions and the brick and the yard and the irrigation is going, Daybreak is something very different with the alleys.
Yes.
You don't put the garage door is not your greeting card to the street. Very different.
Much different, where you're putting the house closer to the street, front porches, and then backloaded alleys with like you're suggesting. All are supposed to invite a more friendly environment, get people socializing more. That's the theme, and it's designed in a way that you could walk. I use more bikes, other modes of transportation other than just a car.
Right. So the idea is people could actually sit on their porch. You could say howdy to your neighbors,
right? Which
you don't get with where you got to drive next door to.
Yeah, it's probably not quite as inviting. We have a big 30-foot setback in most of these subdivisions from the street to the front door, but I still think we have good, friendly neighborhoods. It's just that I think the other design tends to make people walk more, and they're out in front of their houses, and it's easier to communicate. Do
you attract different people, I presume, in terms of who's shopping?
Yeah, I don't know. It seems like over the years, if I've talked to folks that have been part of South Jordan or have moved to South Jordan or been at Daybreak, there seems to be those that really like the concept behind Daybreak, and there are others that seem not to like it. I think Daybreak has enough diversity of housing stock that it really attracts all age groups.
Okay.
And a lot larger spread of social economic background, if you will.
Oh, interesting.
Because their diversity in housing stock also has a diversity in price range. And so I think that it attracts quite a bit different clientele or a customer for them or a resident for us than, say, a traditional neighborhood of a 3rd-acre lot with a large home on it.
And a couple trees, okay.
Yeah.
When we come back, I want to talk some more about that kind of split, and also what do people in South Jordan do for work, because I know some commute and some hang out. So we're going to take a break on Community Roundtable. We'll be back, talk more with South Jordan City Manager Gary Whatcott. Keep it tuned. We are back on Community Roundtable talking with South Jordan City Manager Gary Whatcott. So we left off talking about Daybreak, how a little bit more urban kind of style of living, more people per acre, but regardless, everybody needs water. So where does South Jordan get its water?
Water's going to be an interesting problem for us as a state, actually, I believe, not just a South Jordan community issue, but it's much larger than that. But currently, South Jordan sits under a contaminated aquifer, contaminated by 100 years of mining or more of. And a long time ago, there was a dissent decree that outlined for Kennecott Copper how to clean up that plume, and they're in the process of doing that. But what it has done is it's limited some of our opportunities to find sources of water. We don't have any underground wells that are tapping that aquifer for water sources. So we get all of our water in South Jordan City from a wholesaler, which is Jordan Valley Water District, which most of that water comes from the Deer Creek Reservoir or the Central Utah Water Project, which is part of the reservoir system that we have, Strawberry, and
it's a long ways away.
Yeah, and it's piped down, and that's what supplies most of the Wasatch Front anyway, at least through Salt Lake County and Utah County and so forth. But
so South Jordan is sitting on a bunch of water, but you can't tap it, right? Because if you punch through into that aquifer, you'd be letting all the the poison water up. That's, again, it goes back 100 years.
And I think that, over the years, there's probably more wells than there is truly water in the ground. It's probably been over allocated over the years, many years since the pioneers came. But so anyway, the trick is, what do we do next? Where are we going to get water? And there are lots of ideas and plans about that, including bringing water from the Bear River from Box Elder County all the way here someday, and that's another source. I think that the things we've been exploring are a little bit more closer in proximity than something like the Bear River, and that is, looking at recycled water. How can we use recycled water, whether that's recycled water for more outdoor use. Now, in South Jordan, we're converting all of our large grass parks. Anything with large grass that's civically utilized will have secondary water being used. So
explain what that is, secondary water for landscaping.
In South Jordan, as you know, in the valley here, when the pioneers came, they had a great canal system of water that's coming from Utah Lake through a series of canals. Most of those canals are still in place, and we have, as a city, we own shares in those all those canal companies, and we utilize those to pipe water to not only residential neighborhoods, but in the case we were talking earlier about parks, to tap that water to put it on lawns and stuff like that. It's not potable water for drinking quality, but it is a way to help use less potable water for outdoor use by supplementing this kind of water, irrigation water for outdoor use.
So are you working on a system like that for residential use? So for people's homes, they could have the grayer water for their lawns, or
right.
Not yet?
We have quite a mixed system in South Jordan, where we have some private irrigation companies, we have some publicly owned irrigation, we have some gravity-fed irrigation systems, and we have some that are pumped and pressurized. We don't have a complete citywide system. We have this mixture of variety, but every new subdivision that comes in is evaluated, and if it's feasible, in a cost-feasible way, to put secondary water into a subdivision, we make that happen.
Well, it seems like at some point in the not very distant future, it's going to have to be cost feasible.
Yes.
Even if it's not today.
It will be.
So it seems like getting ahead of it might be smart.
Right.
I mean, sooner or later.
And I think there's an interesting thing. I know people would probably maybe turn their nose at this a bit, but around the country in the United States, we have water issues all over. And we have populations that are really growing and demanding more water. Particularly places like California, Texas, where Virginia, even though you think Virginia is a wet place and has a lot more moisture than we do, their population densities are so much that more usage is required. So they're finding that using effluent from treated sewage is becoming more and more of a way of putting water back into our systems by treating that water to a different level. I mean, the technology is currently there to do it. It's just a matter of when's the right timing for that to take place, and those things are happening around the country.
Is that a sales pitch you need to make to South Jordan citizens to be thinking about this in terms of what the cost is going to be?
Yeah, and I think people got to get past the perceptional issues of drinking something like that. I mean, there's a yuck factor that kind of is associated with that, and but I think honestly, I've been to a few places around the country where they're actually having these kinds of projects where they're actually taking effluent water and using it for potable use, where they've just been compelled to have to do that. I think in our scenario here in Salt Lake Valley, using effluent water from the sewage plants and treating it and using it for secondary water uses has great value.
I mean, that seems like a pretty easy sell.
Yeah, and the water is actually cleaner that's coming off those plants than what we get out of the canals.
Good point.
Yeah, and I think it's a better quality water. So I honestly believe that somewhere in the future that's going to make sense for us from a cost perspective, that we start putting a lot more of that kind of water into use for outdoor and secondary uses.
Are people getting it? I mean, we talked about the single-family homes and the 0.2, 0.3 acre lots, which I'm guessing have a lot of grass.
Yes.
As opposed to like the daybreak folks. Are those folks in those bigger places, are they getting it in terms of it's time for some cactus and less lawn?
Yeah, and I think that we're reevaluating our own ordinances that will be more conservation oriented, allowing those kinds of landscapes to be done, and just trying to find further ways of expediting conservation. And one of the ways we're doing that is through some technologies that are available that actually hook to your water meter, where you can gauge your water usage, you can see the usage per month, and it's graphed against your neighbors, so you get a comparative use of your water usage versus what's happening in your neighbors. And I think Rocky Mountain Power's use this in some of their billings, where you see your comparative usage against your neighbors, and it does have it does cause you to pause a bit and think about, wow, am I really using more power than I should? And in this case, we're hoping water, because you'll be able to go online and check on your own bill account. You can see your water consumption versus others in your area.
And this isn't Tom down the street who's wasting water. This is like aggregate, right?
Right.
So no one's, because I could see somebody going down and getting mad, but this is more, here's what average people in your neighborhood are doing, and here's where you're at.
That's correct.
So you could be a winner or a loser that way. So you have this goal to go from 260 gallons per person per day to under 200. That's a fairly significant.
I think the goal is to get a 25% reduction in use. Yeah, and I think that's going to be a challenge. To get people to think differently about how they use water, and we're pretty. We like our green grass here in Utah, that's for sure.
We like it to bloom, and we might need to be blooming in a different way. When we come back, let's get into trees. Tree City, USA. Not all trees take a lot of water, but let's do that when we come back.
Be great.
We'll be back on Community Roundtable, talking with South Jordan City Manager Gary Whatcott, talking about what's going on in South Jordan, because the place is booming. Keep it tuned. We'll be right back. All good. We are back on Community Roundtable. With us, South Jordan City Manager Gary Whatcott, talking about trees. Where we left off, there is the Arbor Day Foundation. They do this Tree City USA, and you are a Tree City USA. So what's that mean for South Jordan?
Yeah, I think it's been a great thing to be engaged in, and I think it has a lot of meaning for the residents. But really, one of the things that I thought, we've been part of this for a long time, but we've always had trees in our planning as we look to how do we differentiate ourselves from the next neighboring community. If you were to drive down Redwood Road, how do you know you're in a different community? We're kind of in this urban sprawl area, and one of the ways we thought about that was we should have a very nice urban forest.
Okay.
And so trees have been part of our planning process from very early on, and I would say in the early 90s we started creating trees and making trees part of all of our commercial landscaping and as well as residential. So it's been a big part of ours. The Arbor Day Foundation and its Tree USA thing came along far later, but trees have always been part of what we think sets us apart from neighboring communities.
Well, I mean, certainly if you have a lovely shade tree in your yard, the value of your home goes up.
Right.
It's good for the environment. What about, we were talking about water, what about watering all these trees?
Yeah, and there are different types of water. I think Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District has done a marvelous job with their conservation garden in West Jordan, showing people that you can have wonderful trees, shade trees of all types that really are very more drought resistant and drought tolerant. But yes, trees do take up a bit of water, but I think there's a benefit on the other side of that, and that's improved air quality that they provide, the aesthetics, the values that they bring to a community.
Clean the air.
Clean the air.
Less power usage, on and on.
Yeah.
But I mean, part of this Tree USA designation is you have to have basically an urban forester in your city, which is actually kind of cool. So I presume there's a lot of outreach and education involved. I mean, you want to get Tom and Sally and Mary to, not plant a super thirsty tree in their yard, right?
Right. And our urban forester is, posts a lot of things on social media recently, but we also send out lots of information to our residents regarding trees, how to take care of them, how to prevent your trees from getting diseased or have an insect infestation. And really, quite honestly, that's one of the things that Mr. Farley, our urban forester, has done a very good job of ensuring, is that we're planting a very diverse variety of trees for those very reasons of insects and diseases that can spread rapidly and destroy a lot of trees at one time.
I mean, you think of, 100 years ago, everybody planted elm trees because they're beautiful, they grew fast, they were sturdy, and then they, they were wiped out everywhere.
Right.
So good to be thinking longer term.
And we know that there's an ash borer that's been moving across the country and devastating just all of ash trees all over in communities. And so, and we know the ash borer's knocking at Utah's door, and that will do some major damage here. So, we want to make sure that we have a very diverse amount of trees.
So good, and again, so there's some money gets devoted to this, which is kind of cool.
Yes.
Public education and outreach. Like you said, there's all these aesthetic management issues, soil erosion and so on. How long does it take for this to pay off? You talked about driving down the road and suddenly it's South Jordan with more trees. This must be a 50-year plan. Obviously,
it takes quite a bit of time. But the investment, also one of the investments that we did is we have our own city-owned tree farm. So we're buying trees at sapling prices. So they're basically small twigs, and then we grow them into mature trees, and we have hundreds of these in our farm. So we have a lot of park strips that have trees in them that get damaged by automobiles, or if they do get diseased or whatever, we take them out and we can replace them at a very substantially less of a cost by growing your own trees from saplings than buying full-grown trees.
Is that unusual? Do most communities have their own nursery like that?
I don't think that many. Cool. I don't think that's something everybody has.
I'm impressed.
Yeah, and then we water all those trees with secondary water, by the way.
Excellent.
So our farm is use secondary water and not culinary for the purpose of growing those trees.
So a couple minutes left. Earlier we talked about your career as a firefighter in public service, and maybe we can tie this together at the end if we put together city growth, water, and maybe kittens stuck up in the trees.
There you go.
Because that takes us back to firefighters, and I understand you just built a new fire station?
We will be. In this current year's budget, we'll be adding our third fire station. And obviously growth is, the cause of that, and trying to maintain service levels is definitely part of growth. And how do you do that economically without burdening your taxpayers, and trying to do it in a reasonable way? And it's all a balance of trying to make it all work. And this year we'll be adding a new fire station.
And again, you're not a volunteer force, it's full-time professional.
Yes.
How about ambulance service in South Jordan?
Yeah, I think we probably have one of the most unique licensures in our ambulance program. We actually not only provide emergency care, the 911 calls, if you will, but we also provide non-emergent care.
You're doing the transport?
We do interfacility transporting, and in fact, the revenues that we've made by those transport go directly to purchasing infrastructure for the fire station. So a large part of the fire station funding that we're doing this year is coming from that revenue source.
And why doesn't every city do it that way?
Well, the state regulates ambulance licensing, and we always had that kind of program in South Jordan, and we just didn't want to let it go. Where a lot of other communities want to strictly focus on their emergency calls, which is fine, and let the private ambulances do the non-emergency. We felt like we really wanted to make sure that we didn't have our one hand tied behind our back. We never knew what the future would bring, and this has actually been a better thing, because I think the trend we're seeing in firefighting is more oriented towards medical, and in fact now it's even becoming a larger segment of how do we introduce ourselves into post-op care or external hospital extension of their work in the community, where patients aren't traveling back and forth, but maybe fire departments go out and do post-op care and surgery post-ops and things of that nature. So I think it's dovetailing in nicely for us, and I think it was a wise decision to hold on to that license in the early years when we were up against some stiff opposition.
Stiff opposition, delicately put.
Yeah.
So we've only got about a minute left. So real quickly, what's upcoming in South Jordan?
We just passed our budget this year. I think it's a very balanced budget. We actually provided a tax decrease this year in our
Hallelujah.
Which has been good. This is the second year in a row we did a small tax relief on our last year in our property tax. This year we did an energy use tax relief, and then we also paid off some debt this year with our funding, and then we added some money to our needed operations, street maintenance and things of that nature to help improve our road system. So I think everything's a plus for us this year. I'm really happy with where we're headed.
And for you personally, as city manager,
really enjoy my job. South Jordan's just a fabulous community, and I actually live in South Jordan as well, and so I love it, and I'm glad to be part of it.
I mean, it seems like it's a really good deal for you to come from public service and firefighting. I mean, most people are glad when the fire department shows up. I mean, it's not the same reputation as the police department.
Well, you learn to keep a cool head under fire, and I think you also it's given me a broad base to work from, and I think in a city manager's role you really need to work from a broad base, so it's been great for me.
And thank you. We're going to leave it there.
Thank you.
Come back again.
It'd be my pleasure too. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us on Community Roundtable. If you have a comment, you have a question, maybe you have an idea for a future show, get in touch. Our email address is communityroundtable@slcctv.com. Don't forget, you can watch all our episodes, all archived at slcctv.com. I'm Nick Burns. Keep it tuned to SLCC TV.